I want to tell you something I have never said out loud to another living person. Not to a friend, not to a pastor, not even in the dark of my own bedroom when the guilt was so heavy I could not find a comfortable position to lie in. I'm going to say it now, here, because carrying it alone has taken years from my life and added weight to every morning I have woken up since. My name is Nathan Cole, and for 3 years, I drove a little girl named Lily to school every single morning without knowing she was my daughter. I bought her juice boxes when she forgot her lunch money. I stood at the back of her school auditorium during her recitals because her mother was too busy running a company to attend. I let her fall asleep on my arm during long afternoon drives home, and every time she looked at me and smiled, something in my chest moved in a way I could not explain and did not try to. I told myself I was just a decent man doing a decent job. I had no idea I was watching my own child grow up from the wrong seat in the car. But before I tell you what I found out, I have to tell you what I did. Because there is no version of this story that reaches the ending without going through the beginning first. And the beginning is the part I am most ashamed of, the part that set everything into motion, the part that I believe, though I cannot prove it and would not dare argue it with anyone, was the reason my life fell completely apart in the years that followed. Some people call it karma. Some people call it consequence. I do not have a clean word for it. I only know that what I did one night in room 214 of the Grand Holloway Hotel in Maple Crest started a chain of events that would take me from the best moment of my career to the lowest point of my life, and then, somehow, to something I never saw coming. I was 26 years old when I was promoted to manager of the Grand Holloway Hotel. It was not a glamorous position at a glamorous property. It was a mid-range business hotel on the edge of a mid-sized city, the kind of place where traveling salesmen ate breakfast alone and families stopped overnight on long road trips. But it was mine to run, and I ran it seriously. I had worked my way up from front desk attendant to floor supervisor to manager in 4 years, and I was proud of that climb. Every night I did my closing rounds with the energy of a man who believed the world was finally rewarding his patience. I checked the kitchens, I spoke with the night staff, I walked the corridors from top floor to ground with a flashlight and a clipboard. I took that responsibility personally. It was a Friday in late September. A group of university students had booked one of the smaller event rooms for a birthday celebration. I could hear the noise from the moment I stepped onto the 3rd floor. Music and laughter and that particular kind of energy that young people carry, like it costs them nothing. I completed my checks, cleared the kitchen inspection, confirmed the front desk handover, and then made my way through the upper corridor just before midnight. Room 214 was quiet when I got there. The door was not fully latched. I pushed it open slowly, expecting to find it empty or left unlocked by accident. What I found instead stopped me in the doorway. A young woman was alone on the bed, still dressed, shoes still on but barely, lying at an angle that told me she had not chosen that position intentionally. Her breathing was slow and heavy. She was deeply unconscious from alcohol. Her friends were gone. The room smelled like the party had been moved elsewhere, and she had simply been left behind, inconvenient and forgotten. I stood there in that doorway for longer than I should have. And then I did something I cannot defend. Something I have never been able to construct a single sentence around that doesn't collapse under the weight of what it actually was. I did not call the front desk. I did not alert my staff. I did not search the hotel for her friends or contact anyone on her behalf. I told myself I was checking on her safety. I crossed the room, and I violated a woman who could not consent, could not resist, could not even know what was happening to her. I have lived with that truth every day since. What I did in that room was wrong. There is no softer word for it that I am willing to use. It was wrong. And I left before she woke up, and I told no one, and I thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. It was only the beginning. Within 6 months of that night, my life began to unravel in ways I could not immediately connect to anything. My performance reviews, which had always been strong, started coming back with concerns I had never heard before. Small decisions I made started attracting scrutiny from ownership that I had never experienced. A situation with a difficult guest that I had handled dozens of times before suddenly became grounds for a formal complaint against me. Then another. Then a staffing dispute that I was barely involved in somehow landed primarily on my desk. One by one, the things I had built started coming apart. I was demoted from manager to assistant manager, then from assistant manager to senior staff. Then I was let go entirely with a severance that barely covered 1 month of my expenses and a reference letter that was technically positive but practically useless. I told myself it was politics. I told myself the ownership had changed direction and I was a casualty of restructuring. I applied to every hospitality management position I could find within reasonable distance and was either rejected or offered something so far below my experience level that I could not afford to say yes. I told myself my luck would turn. Months passed. My savings thinned. The rejections kept coming, and I kept finding reasons why each one was not my fault. I was not ready to look inward yet. Looking inward meant looking at that room, and I was not ready to look at that room. The time I accepted a position as a private driver, I had been out of my career for nearly 2 years. I was 30 years old, living in a rented room smaller than the hotel suites I used to inspect, taking a job that paid less per month than I used to spend on staff uniforms. The agency matched me with a single client, a businesswoman named Vivien Mercer. I was told she was the founder and CEO of a mid-sized consulting firm, that she kept demanding hours and expected punctuality without exception, and that she had a daughter in primary school who would also need to be driven on days when Vivien had early morning meetings. I took the job because I had no other offer. I did not look up Vivien Mercer before my first day. I had no reason to. The morning I reported to the Mercer residence, Vivien came out of the front door in a tailored charcoal coat, phone already at her ear, a coffee cup in her other hand, moving with the kind of efficiency that told me immediately she had not scheduled any extra time for introductions. She glanced at me, gave a single approving nod at my uniform, and said her first words to me while still mid-sentence on her call. The words were directed at me, but her eyes were already on her phone. She said, "Car seat is in the garage. Lily leaves at 7:45. Do not be late." Then she got in the back seat and the call continued, and I understood that this was how things would work. I met Lily that same morning. She was 7 years old and she came out of the front door wearing a backpack that was almost as wide as her shoulders, holding a piece of toast with both hands like it was something she intended to negotiate with. She stopped when she saw me, looked at me very seriously for a moment. Then she said, without any preamble, "Are you our new driver?" I told her I was. She nodded slowly in a way that reminded me so much of her mother's nod from minutes earlier that I almost laughed. Then she climbed in, buckled herself, and announced that the last driver had never known where her school was and had made them late twice, and she hoped I was better at directions. I told her I had already mapped the route. She said good. And that was how we met. I want to pause the story here for just a moment, because what I am about to describe in the next section is the part that still undoes me when I think about it slowly. If this is your first time watching Hidden Intent Stories, I want you to take a second right now and subscribe, because the stories we tell here do not resolve the way you expect them to. They take unexpected turns, and this one has a turn that I promise you will not see coming from where we are right now. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with me, because Nathan Cole's story is only beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, my routine became the clearest, most structured part of my life. 7:45. Lily came out of that front door. I held the door. She climbed in. We drove. She talked about school the way children talk about their entire world, because for a child, school is the entire world. She told me about a girl named Priya who kept taking her pencil without asking, and a boy named Marcus who was very loud during reading time, and a teacher named Miss Ellen who smelled like lavender and was the best person Lily had ever met. She told me these things every morning with complete seriousness, as though she had been waiting all night to report them to someone, and I was the someone available. I listened. I asked questions. I learned the names of her classmates before I ever met them. When Lily had events at school, performances, parent presentations, sports days, any occasion when a guardian was expected to appear, the call came to me. Vivien would message on the house phone line, "Nathan, Lily has a presentation Thursday at 11. I need you to go." I went. Every time. I sat in small plastic chairs in school halls that smelled like chalk and cleaning fluid, and I watched Lily stand at the front of the room and recite things and draw things and sing things. I was not her father. I was not her family. I was the driver. But I clapped louder than anyone in those rooms. I don't know why. I just did. What I noticed, slowly, was that Lily noticed too. Children are honest in the way that adults are not, because they have not yet learned that honesty can be inconvenient. She started saving things for me. Small things. A drawing she had done at lunch, a sticker her teacher had given her for good work, a story she had written in class that she wanted to read to me during the drive home. She pressed these things into my hand at the end of each school day, with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone who has decided that you belong in their life, and that is simply that. I kept every one of them. I still have them. There was an afternoon in her second year when I arrived at school pickup, and Lily came running across the car park faster than I had ever seen her run. She had fallen during afternoon break and scraped both her palms on the concrete. The school had cleaned it and bandaged it, but she was still holding back tears the way children do when they are trying to be brave, but the bravery is costing them something. She climbed into the car, and she looked at me, and the tears came immediately, and she said, "It really hurt, Mr. Nathan. I don't know what came over me." I reached over the console and held both her small bandaged hands in mine, and I said, I know it did. You were very brave." She cried for 2 minutes and then stopped completely and asked if we could stop for ice cream on the way home. I said yes. We stopped. She got 2 scoops. She was fine by the time we reached the house, but I sat in the car after dropping her off and I felt something that I had no language for, something that sat just below the ribs, warm and unfamiliar and slightly frightening in its intensity. I thought about it for days afterward and never landed on a word for it. Meanwhile, my relationship with Vivien Mercer was slowly, quietly shifting in a direction neither of us had planned for. For the first year, it was entirely professional. She sat in the back. She took calls. She sent messages. She occasionally gave me instructions about schedule changes with the clipped efficiency of someone who had learned that brevity saves time. But somewhere in the second year, something eased between us. I do not know exactly when it happened. There was no single moment I can point to. But I began to notice that her calls ended before she got out of the car. That she sometimes sat in silence for a moment before opening the door, not on her phone, just sitting. That once, when I had driven her home from a late meeting and she had clearly had a difficult day, she said something that was not an instruction. She said, "Do you ever feel like you are running fast in every direction and none of them is where you actually want to go?" I did not answer immediately. Then I said, "Yes." She looked at me in the rearview mirror for a moment. Then she got out. But the next morning she said good morning in a way that was different, warmer, like a door had been opened by accident, and she had decided not to close it all the way. Over time, that open door became something I found myself thinking about more than I should have. Vivien Mercer was exceptional in the way that people who have built something real are exceptional. Not loudly, not for performance, but structurally. She knew who she was. She moved through the world with a particular kind of certainty that I found both intimidating and steadying. She was beautiful in an understated way that announced nothing but revealed everything the longer you were around her. And she was entirely, completely uninterested in the many men who made their interest known to her. This was something I became aware of gradually. She had a life that included professional networks and industry events, and the occasional dinner I drove her to. Men attempted to enter that life regularly. I saw it from the driver's seat, the careful way they tried to extend goodbyes at the end of evenings. The calls I could tell from her tone she had no interest in returning. One evening she came out of a dinner engagement earlier than scheduled and got into the car with a particular quality of silence that I had learned to recognize. After several minutes she said, with no preamble, "Why do people assume that a woman who is raising a child alone must be desperate for someone to step in?" I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "Because it is easier to assume than to ask." She looked at me in the mirror again. She said, "Exactly." Then we drove the rest of the way home in silence, but it was the kind of silence that two people share when they have just understood each other in a new way. What I could not understand, what every person around Vivien seemed to find bewildering, was why she refused every serious attempt at a relationship entirely. She was not cold. She was not damaged in any visible way. She was a warm and capable woman who had simply drawn a line around herself that no one could explain. The staff at her firm talked about it. I heard things in passing, fragments of conversations about how she had been that way since before Lily was born, how she had raised Lily entirely alone by choice, how she had said once in a meeting, someone had apparently asked directly, that she intended to marry only one man, and that man would know who he was when the time came. No one understood what that meant. The general conclusion was that she had loved someone once who had left, and she was holding a space open for him. That was the story people told. It was simpler than the truth. It usually is. My feelings for Vivien were something I managed carefully and kept to myself. I was her driver. She was my employer. The distance between those two positions was not one I had any right to cross, and I knew it. But the feeling was there, steady and inconvenient, present every morning when she came out of that front door, and every evening when I watched the house lights come on after I had dropped her home. I did not act on it. I told myself I never would. Then came the evening that changed that. It was a Tuesday in November, nearly 2 years into my employment with the Mercer household. I had driven Vivien home from the office later than usual. Lily was already asleep. The housekeeper had put her to bed. Vivien came to the front door to pay me an outstanding expense, and we stood in the doorway for a few minutes talking about something ordinary, a schedule for the following week, I think, or something related to Lily's school calendar. And then the conversation slowed in the way conversations do when neither person wants them to end. And she said, "Do you want to come in for a few minutes?" I said yes. I should have said no. I said yes. We sat in the kitchen, and she made tea, and we talked for almost 2 hours. About her firm, about what she was trying to build, about the difficulty of running something real in a world that rewards speed over substance, about Lily, about what it meant to raise a child to be honest in a world that rewards performance, about small things, about things that had nothing to do with driving or schedules or professional distance. At some point she laughed at something I said, and it was the first time I had seen her laugh without reservation, and it was the most disarming thing I had ever witnessed. I drove home that night knowing that my feelings had moved past something I could manage quietly. I also knew that I had done nothing wrong that evening. For the first time in years, I had done nothing wrong. I held on to that. After that evening, something changed in how we existed around each other, though neither of us named it or moved toward it directly. She was still my employer. I was still professional, but there was an acknowledgement in the air between us, unspoken and careful, that something more than a working arrangement had formed. She began to stop the car before getting out, to finish a thought or a sentence. I began to take slightly longer routes home on evenings when traffic wasn't an issue, because she seemed to need the quiet of the car the way some people need a room to think in. Lily noticed the shift before either of us did. Children always notice first. She started calling me by just my name during car rides, dropping the mister, just Nathan. She said it like it had always been that way. Then came the night I finally gathered the courage to say something directly. It was a Saturday evening. I had driven Vivien home from a firm dinner. Lily was at a friend's house for the night. As she reached for the door handle, I said her name. She stopped. I said I needed to ask her something and that if she would prefer I didn't, she should say so and I would not raise it again. She turned and looked at me directly, which she rarely did. She said, "Ask." I asked why she had never married. I said I was not asking to insert myself into the answer. I said I was asking because I had worked for her for 2 years and respected her deeply, and could not understand how someone as clear and capable and extraordinary as she was had closed that door entirely, and I felt if I did not ask I would always wonder. I said all of this in the car, in the dark, without looking away from her. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I began to regret saying anything. Then she said, "Come inside. I'll tell you." We sat in the same kitchen as before. She did not make tea this time. She sat across from me with both hands flat on the table, and she told me. She said that when she was 19 years old, in her second year of university, a group of friends had organized a birthday celebration at a hotel in Maple Crest. She said she had drunk more than she intended to that night and had not been in a state to look after herself. She said her friends had left early without waking her, and she had woken up alone in the morning knowing immediately that something had happened to her while she was unconscious. She said she had known someone had been in that room. She said she had been certain of it. She said she had cried alone in that hotel room for an hour and then got herself dressed and gone home and told no one. She said that in the weeks that followed, she had found out she was pregnant. She said she had gone through every emotion a person can go through and come out the other side with a decision. She would keep the child. She would raise the child. She would not spend her life looking for a man to complete something. But she had made one other decision, the one that no one around her could understand. She had decided that she would only ever marry one man. The man who had been in that room. The man who had done what was done to her. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, necessarily, but because Lily deserved a father, and the only man who was Lily's father was that man, whoever he was, wherever he was. And if he ever came forward, if he ever found a conscience, she would know him, and she would decide then what came next. I sat across from her at that kitchen table, and I felt the blood leave my face so completely that I had to press my hands flat on the table the way she had done, just to feel something solid beneath me. My mind went to Maple Crest, to the Grand Holloway Hotel, to a Friday in September, to room 214, to a young woman alone on a bed, to what I had done and walked away from and buried under years of telling myself I was not that person anymore. I sat there and I looked at Vivien Mercer's face, and I did the calculation I had never allowed myself to do. The pregnancy, the timing, Lily's age, my age when I had worked at that hotel. And every number came back confirming the same thing in a way that made the kitchen feel like it was tilting. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to. I just stood up and I said I need to leave. She looked at me, confused, and I could see that she thought she had shared too much and that I was retreating from the weight of it. She said she understood if it was a lot. I said it was. I said I was sorry. I got in the car and I drove to my room, and I sat on the edge of my bed at 11:30 at night, and I understood, for the first time and completely, the weight of what I had done 9 years earlier. Not as a sin in the abstract, not as a buried mistake in the past, but as a living reality that had grown and learned to read and wore a backpack almost as wide as her shoulders and saved drawings for me at lunchtime, and had called me Nathan with the ease of someone who had already decided I was part of her world. I understood that I had a daughter, and that I had been her father from the beginning without knowing it, and that the woman I had wronged had spent 9 years building a life of extraordinary strength out of the rubble of what I had done to her, and had never once been able to marry the man she loved or the man who completed her family, because she was holding that place, stubbornly and at great personal cost, for the man she did not yet know had been sitting 3 feet in front of her for 2 years. I packed a bag that night. I could not think of what else to do. I thought if I left, if I disappeared from the Mercer household quietly, she would find someone better. Someone who deserved the space I had been filling. Someone who had not done what I had done. I drove to the house the next morning with the bag in the boot and my resignation written on my phone. I knocked at the front door instead of waiting in the car. Vivien opened it. I said I needed to give her something. I held out my phone with the resignation on the screen. She read it. She looked up at me. She said, "You're leaving." I said yes. I said I was sorry. I started walking back to the car. She called for the security guard before I reached the gate. I heard her voice behind me, and then I heard running, and then 2 hands came down on my shoulders, and I stopped moving. I stood in the driveway of the Mercer house with the security guard behind me and Vivien in front of me, and I looked at her face and I knew that I had a choice. I could say nothing. I could create a reason. I could invent something plausible. Or I could do the thing I had failed to do 9 years ago in that hotel room and every day since. I could tell the truth. I told her everything. Standing in the driveway, all of it. The hotel in Maple Crest. My position as manager. The night of the party. Room 214. What I had done. What I had told myself in the moment and told myself in the years that followed. How I had constructed a version of myself that did not include that night and had nearly convinced myself it was real. How the bad luck had started immediately and had not stopped, and how I had told myself it was circumstance and industry politics and anything except what it actually was. How I had ended up as her driver without ever connecting the dots. How I had sat in her kitchen 2 nights ago and listened to her describe what had happened to her in that room and known with certainty, in the moment she described it, that I was the person she was describing. I told her that Lily was mine, that I had not known, that knowing now was the most profound and most devastating thing that had ever happened to me, that I was sorry in a way that I understood no apology could carry. I told her all of it, in the driveway, in front of the security guard, with my bag in the boot of the car. Vivien Mercer stood very still while I spoke. She did not interrupt. She did not move. When I finished, she stood there for a moment longer, and then she turned and went inside without a word. The security guard looked at me. I looked at the ground. I waited for something, for police, for screaming, for anything that matched the gravity of what I had just said. What came instead, after 10 long minutes, was Vivien at the front door again. She said, "Come inside, just that. Come inside." What followed were the most difficult conversations of my life and some of the most necessary. Vivien was not ready to forgive me. She said that clearly and without cruelty. She simply said that forgiveness was not a thing she could offer on a Tuesday morning, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. But she also said that Lily had a father, that she had always known Lily had a father, that the father had now come forward in the worst and most honest way imaginable, and that whatever she felt about that man personally, she was not going to allow her anger to take Lily's father from her. She said, "That child already loves you. I watched it happen and I could not stop it. She chose you without knowing." She said it quietly, and there were tears in her eyes when she said it, and she turned away so I would not see them fall. There was a DNA test. Vivien arranged it through a private clinic, and we waited. The result confirmed what we both already knew. Lily was mine. 100% mine, biologically. I was the father of a 9-year-old girl who called me by my first name and kept my stories in a drawer beside her bed, and had never once, despite all of it, called me anything that did not feel like a kind of recognition I had not yet earned. The days and weeks and months that followed were not simple. Nothing about what Vivien and I built after that was simple or fast or guaranteed. There were hard nights. There were conversations that ended badly and had to be started again. There were moments when Vivien looked at me across the kitchen, and I could see her working to hold two things at once. What I had been to her in that hotel room, and what I had become to Lily on every school run for 3 years, and the impossible work of allowing both to be true at the same time without one erasing the other. I did not rush her. I did not argue for a resolution faster than she was ready to reach. I showed up every day, not as her driver anymore, but as the man who owed her the most patient version of himself he could produce. That was all I knew how to do. Lily found out the truth in the way that children find out truths they have already suspected. Not with shock, but with a slow nod of recognition, as though a word had finally been put to something she had always known was there. When Vivien sat her down and explained, in the careful language you use with a child who is old enough to understand more than you expect, that Nathan was her father, and that they were going to be a family in a new way, Lily looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Then she said, "I know." She said it the same way she had said everything at 7 years old in that car park. Matter of fact, like a child who has already done the math. Then she came and sat beside me on the couch, tucked herself under my arm, and that was that. That was Lily's entire response to learning the truth. She had already decided. She had decided years ago. Vivien and I were married in a quiet ceremony 14 months after that conversation in the driveway. No large venue, no performance. A small room, a few witnesses, 2 people who had arrived at the same place by the most unlikely and imperfect road imaginable. I stood at the front of that room, and I watched Vivien walk toward me, and I held in my body the full weight of everything. The wrong I had done, the years I had lost, the punishment I had not known was shaping me for something I could not yet see, and the grace that I had absolutely not earned and had somehow been given anyway. I do not know what to call that. I am not sure I ever will. What I know is this. I know that consequences are real and that they do not always announce themselves as consequences. I lost my career, my momentum, my sense of direction, my confidence, and nearly my will to keep going. And at the time, I could not understand why. Now I can. I know that a child's love does not wait for permission. Lily chose me before the truth arrived, and the truth arrived to find that she had already done the most important work without any adult's help. I know that the woman I wronged became the strongest person I have ever been close to. And I know that the man I was in room 214 is not the man who stood in that driveway and told the truth. The distance between those 2 men was everything. Traveling it cost me everything. I would travel it again. If you have been carrying something you have never said out loud, I want you to know that the weight does not leave on its own. It finds other ways to collect its debt. Tell the truth before the truth has to find you. That is the only thing I know for certain. That is the only advice I have. My name is Nathan Cole. Lily calls me Dad now. She started the week after the conversation on the couch. She just started. Nobody told her to, she just started. And the first time she said it, I had to excuse myself and go to the bathroom, and I stood at the sink for a long time and looked at my face in the mirror and understood, maybe for the first time, that I was looking at someone who had been forgiven by something far larger than themselves. I don't know what to call that either, but I am grateful for it every single day. And if you have stayed with this story all the way to this moment, I want to say something directly to you. Most people click away. Most people move on. You did not. That tells me something about the kind of person you are. If you are not yet subscribed to Hidden Intent Stories, do that right now. Every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories about the things people carry in secret, the consequences that find them anyway, and the moments that change everything. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because some stories are not just for watching. Some stories are for passing on.